Hola, bebé de luz. Te doy la bienvenida a un nuevo episodio de Insights. Ya tiene varios años desde que saqué el último capítulo y bueno, a veces hay compromisos académicos que me han hecho alejarme un poquito de la creación de contenido, pero pues nada, quiero regresar. Quizá no lo haga con la misma frecuencia con la que lo solía hacer, pero pues no quiero dejar de lado todas estas entrevistas que ya he estado realizando desde hace algunos años. Y pues el día de hoy les presento una entrevista que tuve con un invitado que para mí es súper especial, que es el doctor Peter Killeen. El doctor Peter Killeen es analista de conducta, ha tenido contribuciones muy importantes en el campo. Él es profesor emérito en el Departamento de Psicología de la Arizona State University y ha trabajado temas como los principios matemáticos del reforzamiento, el análisis cuantitativo de la conducta, entre muchos otros que ya nos irá platicando en la entrevista. Y la razón por la que es tan especial para mí es porque él es autor de un artículo que de hecho fue el primer artículo científico que yo leí en mi carrera. Es un artículo que me dejaron leer cuando yo iba en segundo semestre y que tiene que ver con las causas de la conducta. Entonces, este tema también lo tocamos en la entrevista. Y antes de dejarte con ella, te quiero invitar, si eres nuevo por acá, a que te suscribas, a que dejes tu like en el video, porque pues esto me ayuda a que este proyecto se muestre más, que el algoritmo lo enseñe. Y pues es un proyecto al que yo le tengo muchísimo cariño. He tenido la oportunidad de platicar con personalidades como Elizabeth Loftus, como Michael Domjan y como Steve Hayes. De hecho, tengo toda una playlist en mi canal que te invito a visitar. Y nada, espero que te guste. Déjame todas las dudas o comentarios que tengas aquí en la cajita de comentarios. Y ahora sí te dejo con la entrevista al doctor Peter Killeen. So, Dr. Killeen, thanks so much for being here with us today. And well, you've had a remarkable career shaping how we understand behavior and reinforcement. I wonder, how did you first become interested in studying behavior scientifically?
Mauricio, first I want to say what I said to you before we started recording, how much I appreciate your being the glue that keeps different parts of our operation together as best you can in this format. And I'm sure it's having a huge impact on people that are listening to this. So thank you
Thank you.
for us. It's an
Thank
extremely
you.
important role, and you do it well. How did I get interested in studying behavior scientifically? It sort of happened to me when I was an undergraduate. I was
Okay.
in an experimental psychology class at Michigan State University, and they had all these experiments we did every week, and then a big one of our own at the end of the semester. And I loved analyzing the data, and it was mostly perceptual, but I realized that experimental psychology, not behaviorism yet, but experimental psychology could be a lot of fun.
Okay.
And so I took some other classes, and I had contrasts from it. I took a class by a guy by the name Milton Rokeach, who in his time was well known. And one of his more popular books was on the three Christs of Ypsilanti. Ypsilanti is a city in Michigan. And there were three psychotic people, all of whom thought they were Christ. And he put them together in a room to see what would happen.
Okay.
Now, that was sort of a counterexample of experimental psychology. It sounded like fun, and you could sell some books with it, but
Yeah.
it's not what I wanted to do. So I had really good examples and counterexamples. One of the guys I worked with was an old behaviorist of the Hullian, I think, or Spence School called Ray Denny, and he had a theory that what made negative reinforcers work was the period of being able to be quiet, relax, and recover that came after the threat. So you go into a different part of the box or the stimuli change, and the rat or whatever animal goes, oh. And he tested that.
Yeah.
He had predictions and he tested it. And I thought, well, that is neat. Here's a little bit of theory coming in as well. So I worked in his lab and I put rats in runways, straight alleys, I realized how tedious it was getting data that way.
Yes,
Um,
indeed.
and I put frogs in jump out boxes, local frogs. We put in a box, give them a mild shock, and let them jump out to safety. And I got them to jump out, but 3 times out of 4, they didn't jump to the safe platform. They just jumped into the window again. So I realized that I liked studying animal behavior, but this was not a good way to do it.
Okay.
And so, although I must say that early experience probably primed a paper I wrote 25 years later with
Okay.
Abram Amsel and another old Spencean Hullian, running rats in alleys. I decided to measure the acceleration and deceleration as they started and came back using simple ballistic measurements of
Okay.
an object thrown. How does it accelerate? And it generated much more understandable data. So I wanted to call it rat ballistics, but he was a co-author and he wanted something more proper. So we called it kinematics of locomotion to a goal. So that straight alley runways were in my system for a little while till I wrote
Mhm.
that paper and got out of it. Then when I was there, I read the literature. So I read about the operant work of B.F. Skinner, which
Mhm.
I liked. I read about the perception work of S.S. Stevens, Smitty Stevens, which I liked. And I read about the cognitive work of George Miller, the magical number 7. Have you ever heard of that paper, Mauricio?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The one about how we can store uh, about 7 items in our
Yes.
working memory, right?
That was a fascinating article because it posed a lot of questions, many of which didn't answer. And so it stimulated me to say, well, I could maybe answer that. So here are
Okay.
three guys that I wanted to work with. I didn't know which one I wanted to work with most, but they were all at the same place.
Mhm.
They were
Okay.
all they were all at Harvard. So I didn't have to make up my mind yet. I could go there and see what it was like.
Yeah.
And it turns out that all three of those people, Smitty Stevens, George Miller, and Fred Skinner, were engaged in lines of work that I continue doing through my life. So there's a little bit of each of those people in me, even though I only at one point I realized the guys in the operant lab were having much more fun. They were arguing, they were joking, they were helping one another, they were teaching one another. And I said, I think that's where I'm going to go.
Okay.
And so it was Skinner's Pigeon Lab at first, but it became Dick Herrnstein's when I was there. So I learned some things from Herrnstein, but more from my colleagues, from Howie Racklin,
Mhm.
Billy Baum, Bruce Schneider, Alan Neringer, Ben Williams, and there were other people like that that you might know the name of. They were a great bunch of mutually reinforcing teaching
Mhm.
colleagues. It was a wonderful time. I made lasting friendships there. So that was my strange path through experimental psychology to sort of Spencer and Hullian kinds of learning theory to reading the literature and finding people that were really exciting for me to contemplate working with, and then being lucky enough to do it. And then being around other people that I could learn so much
Yeah.
from. So that was my origin story.
Okay. And that's really interesting. I always like hearing about how people came to study what they study because you learn so much about why they end up doing this and the people they learned from.
It,
Eh,
it yeah, yeah. It,
y-
it's interesting back human interest story on the
yeah.
yeah.
So, Dr. Killeen, before maybe we go any further into the topics that we're going to cover, for people in our audience who might not be familiar with behavior analysis, how would you describe what this branch of knowledge is all about?
It's like I had a checkered career. Checkered means, a little bit of this, a little bit of that in its evolution. And so to go back to the origin, Charles Darwin, he was a brilliant naturalist as well as theoretician, but he also performed experiments. He attempted to solve the problem of free will and determinism in self-experimentation, where every time he found himself doing something, he would, with practice, nearly always find this straightforward causation to his behavior of a given action, which otherwise would have been thought to have been performed through a creative act or by inspiration. So he was a determinist, uh, not a simple one, but a sophisticated one. And his colleague, George Romanes, was an early comparative psychologist, and he worked on, you'd call it cognitive behavior analysis of non-human animals. So this stuff from the 1870s and 80s and 90s were a precursor to behavior analyses. Um, Around the turn of that century, 100 years ago, 120 years ago, Edward Lee Thorndike wanted to do an experiment with nonverbal humans. And so he set up a lab in the basement of William James, the great cognitive psychologist. If people have only heard of him, they should try to pick up, ideally, a Spanish translation of his books on psychology because they're so beautifully written,
Mhm.
really. His brother was Henry James, and it was argued that William James was a better writer than Henry James. So I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But it was in William James's basement that he recognized that behavior followed by a pleasing state of affairs will be repeated in that context. So that was the early law of effect, and it was a contextual law of effect, and it had a lot going for it. Early Fred Skinner was a positivist. That means you only talk about what you can see. You can't talk about satisfiers. Even though Thorndike did an operational definition of satisfiers as things the animals will approach or won't avoid. So he had a sign tracking, goal tracking definition of what satisfiers were. But Skinner didn't want any of that stuff. And so he took this satisfaction out of the organism and put it in the environment so that the food itself was a reinforcer, which I never really understood. I mean, I did understand incorrectly when I was starting in this business, but if the animals just had a meal, food's not going to be a reinforcer. It's not a stable quantity. What's a stable quantity is whether or not it's a satisfier. And if the animal is hungry for it, it's going to be a satisfier, not otherwise. So I never understood about Skinner's cleaning up our verbal behavior, overdoing that. The thing about behavior analysis, the more general things, is that Skinner was a creative innovator. He found ways to control behavior with reinforcers and generate replicable patterns of behavior, schedules of reinforcement. Those in his experimental chamber that made data a lot cheaper in terms of human labor than runways, straight alleys, is what really inflamed the growth of his basic behavior science, behavior analysis through the last half of the 20th century. But it provided research questions and techniques for me, my students, and generations of students. So he had a cottage industry, they say, of behavior analysis, but he was also interested in applications. He designed the first air crib. This is a perfectly engineered chamber in which infants can be kept safer than cribs, which are crib deaths and so forth. And I raised both of my kids in an air crib or big Skinner box, and they both are doing okay, happy and productive human beings now, all grown up. I did not keep them in there until they were teenagers. No. The cumulative recorder was a signal invention of his. Pigeons and a pelican. We needed ways to guide missiles more efficiently than we could in the Second World War. Blowing people up is not a good thing to think about, but it was, if there was ever a good war to fight, it was that one. And he did what he could in his creative way to have pigeons guide the missiles. The teaching machines, and when you get the concept of these things, when I came to Arizona State University in 1968, Fred Keller was here, and he had what's called a personalized system of instruction. Do you know what that is?
No, I don't.
What it is break the task down into simple questions, have the students interact with another human being that they can Socratically lead them to the solution. And the other human beings tend to be advanced undergraduate students. And so you have this wonderful reinforcement, you have to control the system so it doesn't get out of whack, but this beautiful human involvement in people that know a little less than you, and by teaching them, learning more. And so the notion of teaching machines got embodied by Fred Keller and by other people like Og Lindsay. Og Lindsay was he took the notion of applying Skinnerian principles to humans, to special education. He measured the depth of sleep with operative principles, generated behavioral geriatric prosthetics, he called them. He developed precision teaching, which is hugely important. And so there were a number of creative individuals like Og Lindsay and others that made the applied aspects of behavior analysis so effective and important that they, by the turn of this century, 25 years ago, applications became a larger part of behavior analysis than basic research. An important part of that was developing techniques for applying the law of effect for special populations, such as children on the autistic spectrum. And now a simple BR schedule controls more behavior in the world than any other thing you could think about, because you know where I'm going. It's got humans on their keyboards and on their computers, and lever pressing gets some beautiful, rich sensory reinforcers. And in fact, the deep learning modules that send links that are going to be attractive to the people also work on the law of effects. And
Hmm.
these large learning models, they call it backpropagation or reinforcement learning. So connections like for Thorndike, connections that were active at the time of a reward get strengthened. So it was true for Thorndike, true for Skinner, true for us, and it's true for modern AI as well. So it's a universal principle.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And uh, now that we're talking about behavior analysis, I get the impression, I mean, it's not like I get it more from the applied psychologists rather than those that work in research,
Mm-hmm.
that they see behavior analysis and neuroscience as opposing traditions. And I mean, almost as if they were incompatible ways of explaining behavior. The question is, do you think that's a misunderstanding? And where do you see genuine points of convergence between them?
I think it's a very, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding because it reflects some truth that
Yeah,
we have different departments that don't talk to each
approaches.
other very much.
Yeah,
It doesn't have to be that way.
yeah,
And what I want to do is share my screen with you
of
for a way
course.
that I learned um, to think a number of years
Yeah,
ago. Do you see my shared screen now?
yeah, yeah. Now I
Okay,
can see it.
good. Um, Aristotle was a genius, a true genius. He was an empirical scientist. Plato was a theoretical person. Aristotle was an experimental, um, feet on the ground, brilliant analyst. And he said there are four things that we need to understand to explain any phenomenon. And he used to understand, the word he used to understand was mistranslated as cause.
Okay.
And so you hear about Aristotle's four causes, but he was
Yeah.
talking about really four explanatory schemes.
Okay.
And those were the efficient cause, the triggers that make something happen. You know what?
Yeah.
The event that comes before and is highly predictive of what comes after, lightning and thunder.
Hmm.
Um, Formal causes, how we talk about things, how we describe them, how we define them. The final cause is why. Why are they like that? What did they do? What function, if any, do they serve?
Hmm.
And then the material cause is the substrates of them, the brain and the body in context. Now, uh, explanation in terms, attempted to explain something in terms of efficient causes is called mechanistic. It's
Yeah.
not good enough usually. Um, formal formal causes is, well, that's theoretical, you know, maybe it doesn't engage the phenomenon. Final cause is functional. What function does the behavior or the object, the hammer, let's say, whatever you're talking about, you could apply the scheme to tools, you could apply it to people, to problems that people have.
Yeah.
And then the final one is the material cause. You can do this at the large scale, and so a final cause might be given in evolutionary terms, or you can do it at the immediate scale. It might be explained in terms of reinforcement.
Mhm.
Um, Same with efficient causes. What switches a person or a thing into that state
Mhm.
or what puts that trait in the germline so that we've evolved to have a blink reflex or whatever. So, but
Mhm.
all these can be done at different scales. Formal cause is simple definition, a good one, and then a complete theory. Now, with material cause, neuroscience, neurophysiology in the short term, and genetics and epigenetics in the longer term. Um, if you try to explain things just in those cause terms, it's called reductive
Yeah.
explanation. Many people, there, long setting the framework to answer your question, okay?
Yeah.
Many people feel that if they don't understand the material cause, they don't understand anything.
Yeah.
And they'll go into neuroscience. And no matter how well you've got these other bases covered, let's say by behavioral theory, they don't care. They want to say which neurons are firing. Only
Yeah.
then do I believe. So people that live down in the basement here of material causes um, tend to be focused on hardcore, simple, reductive explanations. Where now that's it's good because it's a necessary part of science. You need to cover all four bases, but it's easy. Just I've had young colleagues when I was young that were in neuroscience, and they just poo-pooed anything that didn't have an electrode in it or
Yeah.
uh, whatever. And there was a marvelous paper by John, I'm not sure it was John Krakauer, in a major neuroscience paper you might know of. I think it was 2017. Seems more recent than that, but it said why neuroscience needs behavior.
Yeah.
That's a great article, and that was one of the people that had the holy oil of being a hardcore neuroscientist on his forehead. So coming from him, it was so welcome.
Yeah.
So I think it's easy to get stuck in any one mode of explanation. It's easy. As you know, I'm a quantitative kind of guy. One of the things I really dislike are many articles I see in Journal of Math Psych, which get stuck on the formal symbolic models. They're complicated, maybe they're elegant and beautiful if you read that kind of formalism, but they don't make good, solid contact with data. You know, it's just like a just so story. Um, Final cause by itself isn't enough because you can say, well, yeah, they did. Well, this is why Skinner didn't like final causes because people would use that as explanation. Why did he do that? Oh, because he wanted to do that. You know, that was his goal. But how do you know that? You can take any of these things and stick them in as make-believe explanations. They're only real if you can try to tie them all together. And so it's a hard thing for one person to do, but working in the team where some real expert in EEG or whatever neuroscientific tools that they've mastered can work along with the behaviorist to help define the behavior that is in question and get their hands really on better definitions of what's going on.
Yeah. And I don't want. I'm very used to thinking this way because I don't want to miss the opportunity of telling you that the paper you wrote of these four causes applied to behavior in the early 2000s
Mm-hmm.
was actually the first scientific paper I read, and it was one of the first. I was in the first semester of my psychology major, and this professor I had gave us that article to read, and
Who
so
was that? Who was the professor? Do you remember?
yeah, it's Dr. Vladimir Orduña.
Oh, I love Vladimir. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So he made us read this article, and I mean, I'm used to thinking this way because of him since the beginning of my career.
Oh.
So
So that's why you're trying to do this thing, trying to bring these four causes together.
yeah,
I
yeah, I think that's always been kind of my mindset.
I did. That's one of the most beautiful things somebody could say to me. That
Oh,
one of the reasons I'm going about business this way, the way you are with your uh, Neurosapiens network,
yeah.
um, that I have a little responsibility for doing something that I think is so valuable. I'm honored.
Oh, thank you. Oh, now I blushed, I think. Well, now going more into the relationship between behavior analysis and neuroscience, you've done a lot of work on timing and reinforcement, which has actually been very influential.
Mhm.
How do you see those processes, which are behavioral in nature, connecting to what us neuroscientists
Yeah.
study?
Um, okay, let me show. I can't think without images. Okay.
And, and
Uh,
I think that's very illustrative for our audience as well, so it's great.
um, this is from an article by a well-respected neuroscientist studying timing, Marchand.
Mhm.
And the strength of it and the weakness are shown on this page. The
Okay.
strength of it you get down the bottom. You can use these measures to get, this is AUC, area under the curve.
Mhm.
And so it's showing that these things are accounting for a fair amount of, yeah, reasonable, more than chance variance in what's going on.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a nice analysis, but what we have here is all these different parts of the brain that are involved in this
Mhm.
timing decision,
Yeah.
and the connectivity between them is not always clear. It's a very complicated system, and so he's arguing that there's sort of basic timing, and then more specific, and then context specific structures that all get pulled in for different kinds of timing tasks. And you have all of these interacting and paths we don't really understand to get net state output. So this is not simple. It's almost above my pay grade, but some of the processes here make a lot of sense. And that the bottom row, C and D, have got to do with the discharge rate of timing cells.
Mhm.
And um, you get, for motor cells, this is called a ramp, and this is called a ramp. What we have is the rate of firing neurons goes from near zero or zero up to 25 or 30, which is significant, as a function of passage of time.
Mhm.
And so some of the theoretical models for timing is either the height of this ramp or the cumulative number of signals that have been received from these neurons and received in these accumulator cells and absolute timing cells. So that's what lays underneath some of this work, which I admire. I've worked with neuroscientists on timing and um, decision making and response times, but the analysis just is very daunting to me, you know. And I know
Mhm.
that your work is in EEGs,
Mhm.
and I think that's a wonderful tool to use, but it it also generates a lot of different complex data tracks that you then
Yeah.
have to try and understand. And I'm scared of that.
Yeah. No, no, I get it. I mean, it's uh, very complex in terms of analysis and understanding, and I think uh, not only me, but every people is scared of those kinds of signals as
Yeah,
well. However, well, I find that the temporal resolutions of these kinds of methods of electrophysiology uh, are very interesting because we can see the things that change so fast. We can get
yeah,
some notion of those, but I think it's scary
yeah,
for all of us.
yeah.
Yeah,
Things like fMRI are much fMRI are much slower,
slower. Yeah,
and look, I can come back to that in a few minutes when we go on, while we go on talking. But the temporal resolution of EEG is marvelous.
yeah. Okay, and Dr. Killeen, in your mathematical principles of reinforcement,
Mhm.
you introduced ideas like arousal, coupling, and memory, which are concepts that are also studied in neuroscience. How did you come to integrate those into these mathematical models?
Well, I was always searching for simplicity.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I hear your question, I'm not sure when you say integrate, you're saying integrate them with one another or with neuroscience.
No, I mean with one another
Okay.
and
That was one
into
of,
the
yeah,
idea of reinforcement.
that was one of the joys of my early voyage in theoretical work. I decided when I was leaving graduate school, happy to get out, by the way,
Mhm.
it was difficult. Um, I decided, what am I going to do with the next decade of my work? And I knew there was a field with extremely orderly data that was Skinnerian data. And I had some quantitative abilities, not, I never had anything more than what is now taught in high school in algebra and that I learned in college um, in terms of sophisticated courses. So you don't need to be a mathematician to do mathematical psychology. Um, I must say the calculus served me well. But I decided that I'm going to generate a thorough mathematical model or models of all of the data that first turned Skinner and
Mhm.
all of the data that Bernstein put two keys in an operand chamber while I was there. Hey, how come there's two or three keys in that chamber?
Mhm.
So concurrence put a new life in the field. Concurrent schedules of
Yeah.
reinforcement operating at the same time. Um, I was going to generate a coherent theoretical model of all of that. And then how it came about was just through luck. A grad student of mine, Joel Meyerson, who works a lot with Len Green at
Mhm.
Washington University on
Okay.
discounting, very smart guy. He had a bunch of panels, floor panels made up for some experiment he was going to do. And when he was finished with them, I said, hey, let me use those. He said, okay. So I used his floor panels and I found all of this movement around that whose rate increased, almost linear function of rate of reinforcement. So not much happening in the chamber, animals not doing much. The more
Yeah.
often food comes, the more active they are. And I saw this surgence of activity in the drop off of it, did some simple models of it, and came up with the notion that a pure measure of behavior uh, is going to be a linear function of rate of reinforcement. But arousal is only one. Arousal is what I call that. By getting animal to behave more and more and more,
Mhm.
you're seeing and able to measure the arousal hypothetical construct in the organism. But that's not about reinforcement. That's about putting the steam in the boiler of the train, but you need somebody steering the train or the vehicle, putting gas in the tank of a car, igniting the gas, but you need a steering wheel. And what is that? And Charlie Catania had done some beautiful studies on topographical tagging of showing that the responses that come before the reinforced response are also reinforced. Um, I followed that up with leaderboards on fixed ratio schedules and followers getting food whenever the other guy did and made a key peck. And then I said, no, you have to make three key pecks or six or 12. And as I did that, response rates increased and increased. And that's
Mhm.
because requiring 12 responses before reinforcement meant that the target response, key pecking, is most likely to occur before reinforcement. And
Mhm.
so animals don't go fast on ratio schedules because it gets them food faster. They go fast because these guys, no matter what they did, they're going to get it at the same rate. Um, and so I realized, okay, we've got reinforcement acting backward in time, or better yet, nothing works backward in time. What we have is the memory of these earlier responses that
Yeah.
are present when reinforcement occurs. So reinforcers can affect more than one thing. They can affect adjunctive behaviors as well as target responses.
Yeah.
They can affect up to a dozen responses before the one that gets reinforced. So once you have this insight, you can start working out ways of trying to simplify what the models might be that caused this trace of memory trace of responding
Yeah.
that gets reinforced. And so the only thing left was that unconstrained response rates should go infinite, but they have to squeak into a time window. And each time, if you imagine 1 second interval or 1 minute interval, each response that sneaks in that interval leaves less time for other responses to sneak in. So that's the constraint. That's a simple statement of the constraint on responding response rates, absolute response rates. And it generates a model that's similar to Bernstein's hyperbola, but it
Mhm.
interprets all the, not all, interprets the major construct, his Arcebo, very differently. And so it started with my grads. I had great graduate students. With them, this all started coming together. And until I wrote the big 1994 behavioral brain science article on mathematical principles of
Mhm.
reinforcement. And people may misunderstand by principles. I don't mean laws. I don't mean done deals. By principles, I mean the same thing that scientists have always meant, like Newton. You start out with the three basic laws of mechanics of Newton.
Mhm.
By itself, that's not going to get you anywhere. You got to
Yeah.
have models that implement these. So my principles were very open-ended. That incitement, like food for hungry organism or whatever, will arouse the potential for behavior. Direction by sign tracking mechanisms is what it is. Will Animals will approach signals of reinforcement, will direct it, and they can only go so fast. Um, but from that, you need specific models to engage those principles with behavior. So by calling it principles, I wasn't trying to get all, I've got principles of behavior.
Yeah,
No, these are very general statements. You could disagree with, but it's hard to disagree with, I think. Um, and then the models could be right or wrong. You try different models and what works, works. I got
yeah,
insights about how to do science from a dear colleague, older than I, David Hestenes, who's a physicist. And he had a firm grasp of theories and models and on and on. And I learned so much from him in discussions with him. Um, and so we all learn from others. Now, I've forgotten what your question was. I've gone rambling on, Mauricio, all this time. What was your question?
well, the question was, how did you come to integrate these principles, such as arousal, coupling, memory, into the study of reinforcement and into these mathematical models of reinforcement?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's pretty much the story I told.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and it's been great fun pursuing. I think I finished all I've got to say in that area. My latest paper is not quite so Skinnerian. It's about delay discounting, probability discounting, and lotteries. Everyone
okay,
has heard of Kahneman and Tversky and their prospect theory. And by taking things that I learned by analyzing animal data uh, and how I had to think about deploying models and theories, I analyzed human probability discounting and Kahneman and Tversky scenarios from a very rational but radically novel approach.
yeah,
And that let me develop a theory that accounted for all of the anomalies that Kahneman and Tversky pointed out with one simple model.
yeah,
And I'm waiting to hear back reviewers' comments as why they
yeah,
don't like it.
yeah. Now that I'm hearing you tell this story, one thing that comes to mind and that I think is so important, and I mean, it's an idea that I always try to transmit to my students, is the importance of learning about what other scientists, not only psychologists, are doing, such as what's happening in physics, what's happening in chemistry, because you learn a lot from them and from their methods, and then you can get a whole bunch of new ideas to apply
Yes,
into your own field of work.
absolutely right. I don't think locked up in your own room you can get very far with
Yeah,
ideas. But you can see a biologist solved this problem thus in such a way. What a clever experiment.
yeah,
Hmm, I wonder if I could do something like that in my own field of work.
yeah,
Or reading the modern work on um, lower organisms, lower biomes such as oh, there's Arculian. There's a new kind of small viruses, bacteria, and Arculian entities. And you can realize that the whole notion of selection, of Darwin's selection, is true. But for the vast majority of living things, it doesn't hold because evolution does not happen the same way with bacteria and
yeah,
viruses. And there's an awful lot of gene transfer, awful lot of learning by imitation, learning
yeah,
by incorporating. And that's what we're doing now. Maybe my words will be a little helpful or a little inspiring. And I'm not reinforcing the learner's behavior. I'm not giving them a pellet when they answer
yeah,
a question correctly. And I think a lot of learning, I know a lot of learning happens that way. And that's not
yeah,
something learning by imitation and such that we study so much as we should, I think.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So, Dr. Killeen, if it's okay with you, since I don't want to take a lot more of your time, and I think we've covered a lot of what of the other questions I prepared, I'm just gonna jump right into Q11,
Mhm.
so we can talk a little bit about applications of
Yeah.
behavior analysis and your work. And In your collaborations on ADHD and neuroenergetics, you've looked at how energy and attention affect behavior. How can quantitative behavior analysis contribute to understanding conditions such as ADHD?
Well, I like the question because that was an important part of my life for a while. I got a phone call one day asking if I wanted to work at the Institute for Advanced Studies for a year.
Mhm,
Now, in my mind, I thought, oh, Princeton, that's where Einstein was. That's where all of the great luminaries have passed through. That sounds wonderful. Okay. And then it turns out I was able to get released from my classes during that time. And Terje Sagbleden, a marvelous Norwegian who had been a postdoc with Charlie Catania, had convinced the Institute for Advanced Study in Oslo to fund him and a group of world-class experts on ADHD to come together and spend a year together thinking together, which was a
mhm,
good idea because most of the thoughts about ADHD had been kicked around. There was not too much novel going
mhm.
on. And so we got together and I asked, why me? And he said, well, you're smart and you know mathematics and you know behavior. And maybe all these other guys are experts in ADHD, no problem. We need somebody like you to stir it up.
Mhm.
So I went and fell in love with my new colleagues there because they were from all over the world, South Africa and Israel and US and several places in Europe and on and on. And they cared, they're experts. I was able to collaborate like never before. But at the end of we were only a couple of months before the end of our time there. And we felt that we were just turning the crank of old stuff, getting old stuff published. And so I went for a walk with Vivian Russell and Rosemary Tannock and one other person on skis in the beautiful backwoods right next to Oslo. And we mulled over what's really going on. And Viv Russell, mostly by herself, came up with this neuroenergetics notion that part of the problem might be that um, not that the brain can't process dopamine, but all of the other silly, they weren't silly, but all of the other non-validated hypotheses around
Yeah.
about ADHD. So we tried a new approach. Let me do this again.
Mhm.
Okay, there we go. Um, our theory was that here's a neuron, and neurons only have enough energy to fire for at most 10 seconds or so. But when they're firing and releasing glucose, that
Mhm.
sends a signal to astrocytes that are around them. And these astrocytes they do a number of things, but one of them, they're the energy store converters and storers of the system. So once it says somebody here is firing, uh, it calls for more um, uh, lactate from the, oh, sorry, here we go, more glucose from the blood vessels around it.
Yeah.
And it converts that into lactate. It's called the
Yeah.
astrocyte neuron lactate shuttle. And by calling for more glucose from the capillaries, that's what gives the bold response, the one that fMRI reads.
Yeah.
So it tells what's operating. And our hypothesis was that this shuttle was constricted for various reasons we hypothesized. And if that's the case, after the neurons have fired for a while, they're getting a trickle of new energy from the astrocytes, but not enough. So that part of the brain that's using those circuits gets fatigued and attention has to go elsewhere because staying attending to something you're processing poorly at the time is painful. And so
Mhm.
one of the reasons for vagrant attention in ADHD is this model. So what could we do to measure what was going on? I generated a model that was had to do with it's called drift diffusion decision model, that evidence for making a response was accruing on one of these ramps that we're talking about that had some
Mhm.
variability. And that's going to generate a probability distribution, a density that would have a particular shape, which I define mathematically and I won't bother you with. So one of the big components here was the question was whether now I'm thinking in terms of energy accumulation, whether this is slowed in people with ADHD. And then also, sometimes they just opt out. So I needed an attentional model. So if they're sort of engaged, they're hanging here in this attentive state, and these processes are going on. But sometimes they just peel away with some probability in this Markov chain and go into an inattentive state. So there's two things: drift diffusion, accumulation of energy, and an attentional mechanism. And what that, okay, I didn't get my last slides in here. What that did was, let me see if I've got them here per chance.
Mhm.
No, what that did was give some signatures so that there was like three parameters in the model, and two of them were key. One of them, how much information had to accumulate before you make a decision. That's a criterion. And the other was rate of accumulation of information. And I and subsequently a half dozen other people applied this model to ADHD, and they found you always got a slowing of information processing with ADHD. And it did follow the form that I outlined in this model. Um, Not too many other people picked up on this. A few did. And so that gave us a set of questions that we could ask and predictions that we could make. And in our major paper on this, we made a dozen different predictions about tasks, how it engages them, what alternate neural humors like norepinephrine could work,
Mhm.
why norepinephrine would work because these astrocytes also have norepinephrine receptors on them, and they
Mhm.
also stimulate the astrocyte uh, put out
Yeah.
lactate. We still don't know where the bottleneck is, whether it's in the astrocyte or in the shuttle process or in the receivers of the neurons. We do know that the other oligodendrocytes that cover the axons are impaired in ADHD, and that slows down signal presentation. And all of those things you can model and test the effect of drugs that might help in terms of these reaction time measures and other measures that go along with them. So
Okay.
that's been great fun. I published maybe and up to a dozen papers on this phenomenon and this
This.
model of it. And I don't think there's a better model around, but then that's me.
Yeah. Hey, Dr. Killeen, I wonder if I could maybe ask you a couple of questions that two uh, very active behavior analysts who are very young and who are trying to do a lot of functions in new students that sent to me.
I'd love that.
Yeah, so the first one is by Diego Avila. He's from Colombia, and he asks, okay, given the historical isolationism of behavior analysis, do you think that theories such as the mathematical principles of reinforcement or the behavioral systems theory or multiscalar molar behaviorism could help facilitate an integration with other behavioral sciences?
Well, that's a good question. It's a very good question. Yes and no.
Okay.
When you have a theory like mine, MPR, mine and my colleagues, my students, um, that puts up a blockade. There's a famous line that was repeated by Walter Mischel, a developmental psychologist,
Mhm.
and I think there's some truth in it. And it goes this way: most scientists would rather use somebody else's toothbrush than their theory.
Yeah.
And so people in, let's say, mainstream cognitive, where my theories or any of these others are pretty good theories and models, they look at them and there's this other thing called NIH, not invented here,
Mhm.
that's not my or my students' model. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say, yeah, oh, definitely. NPR and multi-level selection and RFT is really going to help us get across. I don't know. I think one of the things that helped was Steve Hayes, who's a brilliant man, um, took Gestalt psychotherapy
Mhm.
and he labeled it behavioral RFT. Uh, got another name for it also. And it works. And so he opened the door to bring in psychotherapy into behavior
Yeah.
analysis. And a lot of people were eager for something like that. It did seem to work for them. And so that was opening the doors in one direction for one of us
Yeah.
by taking in concepts from outside. I think the best way to interact with other people is to engage them in working with you, with they having their specialty and uh, I having mine, and we do something special out of that. I've done that over the
Yeah.
years with mathematicians such as Tom Taylor and Neil Weiss. I've done that with philosophers like Burgos.
Mhm.
Um, and what comes out of our work together is so much more beautiful than I could do by myself, or maybe
Yeah.
they could do by themselves. And so I think the theories aren't going to do it by themselves. If
Yeah.
anything, if anything, they're a little bit of a fence against it because who wants to use your toothbrush? But when you're
Yeah.
working alongside of somebody and finding that, hey, he's better at pitching the ball, I'm better at hitting the ball, together we make a team. Um, that's where progress will happen.
Yeah. Okay. And the other question is from Jean Del Rio. He's from Peru.
Mhm.
He says, in the 1990s, you published your work on emergent behaviorism and drew on some of Mario Bunge's philosophical ideas.
Yes.
Considering the concept of emergence, how do you see the future relationship between behavior analysis and emergentism?
Wow, that's a deep question. I recently wrote a paper on agency, and I
Mhm.
can send links to this to anybody that would like. And I hadn't come back and revisited the thing on agency until I was talking with Felipe Cabrera from Guadalajara,
Mhm.
and, and he's a fan of um, I forgot the people, but they're emergentists, if you would.
Mhm.
And he convinced me to work with him on writing this paper.
Mhm.
And so I did, and I got another neuroscientist on board. And the question we asked in this agency paper, which is in the Journal of General Psychology, um, is how can we be determinists, because most people in our business are,
Yeah.
and human beings that make choices?
Yeah.
How can we put these thoughts
Yeah. How
together?
do we reconcile these two?
So I decided that's a problem on my bucket list with the help of Felipe and Steve Helms-Tillery, a neuroscientist. Maybe we could solve it. And so we came at it through a hierarchy of reflexes, with the reflexes on the top, and reflexes in terms of closed feedback systems, both negative feedback and positive feedback systems. The ones on top being ones where the ones below didn't work. You know, I'm walking along and I trip a bit, I automatically have reflexes that will cross extension reflexes, get the underfoot out. Now, so you can go up and up. And much of our behavior occurs without conscious mediation because we've learned how
Yeah.
to do it, tying shoelaces. You know, I don't have to
Yeah.
anymore. Uh, but when the shoelace breaks or something like this, you go, what? How am I going to get this tied now? And
Yeah.
yeah, you generate models. So I could tie a knot in it. No, if I tie a knot in it, it won't go through the eyes right. Well, I could get another pair of shoelaces from that other shoe. Yeah. Wait, why am I trying to solve this problem? Why don't I just wear different shoes today? I'll fix these tonight when I come home. Okay. See, all these things go on. You're building models, and the models are borrowed from history that you've had as you're trying to solve this problem. And so it's that process of, because we can't proceed on automatic pilot, which is the preferred mode, we have to jump out of that loop
Yeah.
and put together thoughts. And that's consciousness, that's agency. Now, the thoughts I put together depend on my history, of course.
Yeah.
What makes me choose not wear that other pair of shoes rather than fixing this particular shoelace? I don't know, but the fact that these are two options that I'm balancing, it would take me an extra 5 minutes to fit the shoes. They'd look better with my outfit or whatever, but I have to go through this process, and that's what
Mhm.
thought is. That's what agency is all about. Is generating models
Yeah.
from our history. Everything has got a history. Was it predetermined that I changed shoes? No, because when things are in balance like that, very small things could make a difference. I, they could loom larger in my shoe rack over there. They happen to be close to hand. I can get them. Maybe that's what causes the decision. So we're largely deterministic creatures. And even when we're creative and agental, it depends on past histories of reinforcement, but that doesn't mean it's predictable either by us or others. So,
Yes.
but nobody, unfortunately, you have to worry where you publish things. It was a good journal, Behavior and Philosophy, but nobody very much picked up on that emergent behaviorism paper. I thought it was going to change the world, uh, but no, you know, yeah, okay, that sounds good. No, move on, do what we know. So you take pleasure in writing. You take pleasure when a student from Colombia has read that and remembers it. My gosh, that is cool.
Yeah.
Maybe it will have an impact.
Yeah. And lastly, I would like to ask you,
Mhm.
wait, after so many years of studying learning and behavior, how has it changed the way you think about your own behavior or how
Uh,
you go about your daily life?
I, I I believe Skinner early on when he said that the first job of a scientist is to keep doing good science.
Yeah.
And so I remember silly things when I was just out of graduate school. We didn't have email then, back in those days. So people would send these little cards saying, "Can I please get a paper copy of your article?"
Hmm.
It's like I had a corkboard map of the world up there, and each time I got a request from Brazil or Mexico or Europe, I put a pin in there, and
Okay.
different colors for different articles. And I
Yeah.
go, actually, that's pretty cool. And I don't mind doing that at all. Or in my relay racks, I'd have lights that would come on different times, and I'd go in there and watch the lights coming on and off. I tried to find ways of reinforcing my behavior, of making
Yeah.
the fun parts, the good parts, be salient.
Yeah.
And the hard work that science always is, it was there, but I'd get to these points and I wouldn't hesitate to take pleasure in it. And I'd rearrange my life to make it that way. When I visited Skinner in the basement of his house, I once found the light that he talked about. When he's writing, he turns on a desk lamp. And when he stops to get a cup of coffee or whatever, he turns the lamp off. And that
Okay.
generates a cumulative record for him of his time. And he'll come and look at it and say, "Oh, I didn't do so well on Tuesday. What was I doing then? Oh, yeah, okay, I got to do better." You know,
Okay.
lots of he himself kept himself going with lots of feedback. Uh, so I do that. I know response cost is very important, so I try to minimize the cost of doing things that I want to do, and things I don't want to do. I increase the response cost for. I keep my beer down in the cellar, so I have to want the beer enough to go down into the
Yeah.
cold hard cellar and pull it out and bring it back up. So I manipulate response costs and payoffs, and I take pleasure, as you said, when I read good science in any area. Current biology is a good place to amazing stuff. I think it's free online. Amazing stuff by our neighbors, the biologists, in what we
Yeah.
do. And I try to find time in my life for a sense of awe every day, whether it's
Yeah.
about a butterfly outside my window or whether it's about a paper I just read.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And so beautiful. Uh, I remember when I first started creating content for social media and trying to do this science communication work. Uh, I felt so overwhelmed by everything you're supposed to do, and you're supposed to keep things short, and you're supposed to make some graphic impact and visual impact. And the moment I started just enjoying these interviews, calling the people that I want to learn from, it just started kicking off since it's rewarding for me. So I keep on doing it, and it's been great.
And you keep doing it better, I'm sure, because sometimes you look back at a videotape and say, something wasn't perfect there. And so just by doing things, you can't
Yeah,
let that's Skinner's principle also. You can't gain wisdom by sitting in a cave. You have to get out and
yeah,
do in the world and do things. And so I'm glad you made it past that hurdle of all the things you're supposed to do. And
yeah.
I watched, I was fortunate enough to be able to watch a little bit of your interview with Charlie Catania, and I thought you did it just beautifully. And he did well. He's used to doing that. And it was a very worthwhile set of interactions and with Michael Domian.
Yeah.
Michael Domian is whom I was really thinking about. Um,
Yeah.
he's a great guy. So I, I don't know how we ensure our survival, which was some of the questions of your students and you, other than by doing the best possible science we
Yeah.
can and making sure that it's not just in journals that only people like you and me read, that you try to
Yeah.
reach out and show the world as a whole and get more crack hours writing papers like we still need behavior analysis to
Yeah.
help open the door to cooperations that are mutually beneficial.
Yeah. Definitely. So, Dr. Killeen, thanks so much for your time. I hope uh, you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And I hope our audience has also enjoyed it and that they can learn a lot. And if they maybe got interested by some of these topics, they can go and search more and look into these topics. I'm gonna leave some links to some of your papers right here in the description, so people can go and look into your work. Okay?
Why don't you make my email available to them too,
Okay.
if there's something they want? Much of it is on ResearchGate.
Yeah.
Some is on academia. But if they have a question or if there's a paper they can't get, they should feel free to contact me.
Excellent. So I'm gonna put it on the screen so it's not as easily readable by spam um
See,
things.
you did learn things. Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thanks
Great
again,
getting to
Dr.
know you.
Killeen.
Great getting to know you and your audience.
Oh, you too. And guys, I hope you all have a great day as well. Thanks, Dr. Killeen. Bye bye.
Bye bye now.